to join. So we'll give it a few minutes to see people and the number of attendees joining the call go up, and then we'll officially get started on today's webinar. Great, I can see some familiar alumni names joining us here and some new ones, which is fantastic.
And a familiar teacher too, hopefully.
Oh, hopefully. Ignacio and I are really looking forward to welcoming you all today for today's webinar. Despite the fact that South Africa, where I am, and Spain, where Ignacio is on lockdown, we're thankfully to the powers of the internet, we're still able to reach everyone, which is amazing. Great.
Powers, I would say, in my case, the powers of mobile, not internet, Wi-Fi.
Well, what do we do without mobiles and internet?
Cellular.
It would be an interesting time without these, without this technology. So, and talking of technology, today's webinar is looking at why user interfaces are quite often very boring. They look like lists, look like what would appear on paper, when actually technology gives us so many more options to make it more creative than normal. So we're going to get going for the day. Thank you everyone for joining us, and particular thanks to Ignacio for sharing his thoughts and expertise with us today. So just a reminder for all the students, if you've got questions for Ignacio, please do use the Q&A function, which is at the bottom menu of your screen with Zoom, to type any questions that will help us get around to making sure we answer them all by the end of the webinar. And for those of you, anyone who really enjoyed the session and wants to share with colleagues, we'll be sending you all around the recording of the session tomorrow. So on that note, I'm going to hand over to Ignacio. Over to you, Ignacio.
Hi, thanks for joining us. Thanks, Sarah, for arranging it for us. Today we'll be talking about user interfaces. Now, we tend to think of user interfaces like the last leg of the financial service that we offer. And I really want you to change your thinking on that. The user interfaces is the service that you offer. The user interface is everything. In a traditional physical environment, you put your product inside a box that goes on a shelf. So your product is inside. In a digital environment, it's not. The product is the user interface. There's nothing between you and the product. It's the user interface is the product. So anything you can do on the user interface is functionality of the product or the service. So the user interface is everything. So I'm always, I must say, a little bit disappointed when I hear people kind of designing products or services, and then they say, oh, and we'll get the designers to do the UI on that. Well, the UI is everything. I mean, what is there other than UI in a digital experience? It's everything. And so I think one needs to be a lot more deliberate in the design of the user interface than generally we are. We leave it as a technical step in a process of product development. At the same time, well, because of that, I think we need to approach the UI with a lot of very strong principles that underpin our service. And it's not a tactical thing that we'll figure it out by running A/B testing on some clients and whether they like this or that. Yes, there's of course a lot of room for optimization of the user experience with testing with customers, but it's a lot more than that. So I'm afraid I have to start my discussion on UIs based on principles, because the UIs execute or implement some principles that you have. And if you start UI design without principles, because you think you're so practical and pragmatic that you could just jump through to the right answer, I think you're very wrong. You have to have very strong principles to design a UI. So I'm going to give you my principles. These are not necessarily the only ones that you can believe in, and maybe I'm wrong in a case or two. It's up to you. But what I would urge you is to start with strong principles. So here's the first one. I trust you can see the screen. Yes, Sarah, everybody can see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen, exactly.
So here's my first principle. If you want your customers to figure out your user interface, then deliver intuition, don't deliver simplicity. Simplicity is not the objective. Now, of course, if you can be simple, all the better. There's not an argument for being artificially complex and complicated, This is an argument for simplicity not being the be all and end all. Simplicity is the thing on the right, because it's simple because there's only 5 items on that mobile money menu, and all mobile money menus kind of look like this. Very, very simple. There's only 5 things you can do. But it's not intuitive. It's not clear what's behind each of these items, perhaps. It's not clear how you combine them to manage your money in a holistic way. Yes, okay, functionally understand what they are, but what is my money management? How do I project my money management system onto this list of 5 things? These are executables, but this is not a money management system. Now compare that to the thing on the right, sorry, on the left. That is my informal money arrangements, the thing that most people have before they transition to the right. So money might be in envelopes, might be in jars, might be under the mattress, might be in boxes, and these boxes might be wooden or metal. They might have a lock or not. The key of the lock I might keep, or I might give to someone I trust, some neighbor, to put distance between me and the box. The boxes you might need to break in order to get money out of it. They're made of mud. The boxes that walk around, they're called animals, cows and sheep, where I store my money. Boxes might be other people, money guards, people I trust that I give my money to for safekeeping. Might be a group of people. So what I want you to get out of this is not necessarily that this is fantastic, but just think about how intuitive all this is. I think if we did a little poll, I give you a purpose of some money, let's say an inheritance, I think we would all pretty much agree where it goes and where it doesn't go. Inheritance money doesn't go into an envelope, very clearly. It probably doesn't go into a savings group either. So what do you do with inheritance money? And so what the left shows is intuition. You know what is the right thing to use at any point in time, but what is not as simple. The cow is not simple to manage. If you had to write an information memorandum on a cow, it would run pages and pages and pages because it can get sick, it can get this and that. So why is this intuitive? Well, because each box is kind of intuitively suggestive of purpose or the kind of money it should hold. And it's intuitively suggestive of terms of use, what you get out of it. With a cow, you get daily interest in the form of milk. If you put it in a box, you don't. So there's very little explanation required, and people intuitively know what kind of money goes where and what are the limitations or the advantages of using each. So what we need in a user interface is something that projects into your mind much more like on the left than on the right. Shouldn't be simple, it should be intuitive. Second point is that second principle, all money management is about separating money. It's very hard to separate, to have any kind of money management if you think of your money all in one pot. But what's the difference between poor people and us is that we intellectualize the separation of money, and that we call a budget. It's a thing happening on the right. It's happening outside of our stores of value. We may have one store of value, we may have multiple, but our budget transcends all of that. That's how we really decide that this dollar is not like that dollar because this is for rent money and this is for food money. That is exactly why the things on the left work so well, because then poor people can then act out the money separation. They're not very good at abstracted thoughts. They're very literal. Things are exactly what you say they are, what they look like. They're undereducated, don't do anything complicated, numbers. And very importantly, the budgeting works very well when it's a once a month sort of thing, but not when you're making constant decisions. And when you lead uncertain lives, because you do not know how much money you're going to make today, you do not know whether something is going to happen health-wise to your family that can overwhelm your means, then you need a lot of decisions all the time. What do I do with the extra money that I made today? With a budget, it works well with those of us who are salaried, make a decision once a month or even once every year, and you can stick to that budget. They need to be making decisions all the time. So they're acting out their money decisions. I made a little bit of extra money today. I'm going to put it in this kind of pot because it's for that sort of purpose, and a little bit on this envelope because it's for me to have some me money. Third point, and I think this one is really not well understood. Friction is good. Somehow we got into this idea that friction is something to be eradicated. But let me tell you, what do you think happened to that car on the picture on the right. Why did it get off the road? Well, because there was no friction. We design cars to go as efficiently on roads as possible. But if you make the road also very efficient, like for example, freezing it over with ice, there is no friction. The car won't move, or you won't be able to control it. So friction is what gives us control. You want the right amount of friction in terms of the wheels and the road. Has to be an optimal kind based on the kind of road or traveling that you're doing, but the optimal number is definitely not zero. Whereas we handle financial services like it's as frictionless as possible, buy now with one click. Now, friction is important friction is important for when you're at the point of making a payment. Please make it simple for me. But friction is the enemy when it comes to managing money. And that's exactly why the things on the left work very well, because you're separating out your money. Each one has a different friction, where frictions can be different things. Indivisibility is the cow. You cannot sell half of a cow. And so this is only subject to large temptations, not small temptations. Waiting period, where for the Rosca, you need to wait until the next meeting before you can access any money. Penalties that you might incur, like for example, breaking the mud bank. Now you'll have to buy a new ceramic pot to put your next set of money. Social pressures, mental labeling is extremely important. Because this money is clearly for this sort of thing and not for that sort of thing, simply because the pot represents it and suggests that to you. So friction is something to be optimized, not minimized. I also feel very strongly that a lot of us who come to financial education with a more advanced, richer, more educated background miss, which is that if you want people to fulfill their objectives, you need to be very specific and very precise. Bind people, tie them to the mast, force them to decide or pre-decide. And what is your goal? The nice thing about the left is that there's a lot of ambiguity, because you might be thinking that a particular pot of money is, for example, for school fees for your children. Let's say the wooden box. But what if your daughter, you find out your daughter just got sick and needs to go to the hospital? Is it legitimate for you to go into, do you feel authorized yourself, morally authorized to go into that school fees money to take her to the hospital? Well, maybe yes and maybe not. It's your decision. There's arguments, I could argue it both ways, but it's down to you to decide that. And that's why ambiguity is so important, because if you lead a life where no one is guaranteeing you anything, no one is guaranteeing you a salary, then ambiguity is your friend. It's not your enemy, it's your friend. So it's only those of us who are promised a salary at the end of the month that we want to tie ourselves, because if we don't meet our goals, it's only down to us. So they need the room to undo some of the decisions that they thought they'd made because circumstances have changed. So for poor people, for richer people, for us, we manage things by separating our portfolio. You have liquidity money and I have discipline money. Well, if you're poor, you can't afford to have two types of money. Every dollar needs to be discipline money when you don't need it, and liquidity money when you do. So all these forms of savings or money management that I showed there on the left, you can undo. None of them are cast in complete stone. People have fuzzy goals. If you do not know if you can achieve certain goals, why set your heart on it? So people don't have very precise goals. What is your goal? You might ask a farmer. Well, to buy more goats. Yeah, no, but that's not the ultimate goal. What would you do with the goat money? Well, I'll decide that when I have enough goats, not before. So people don't manage very concrete goals. And I think it's to their psychological advantage not to. Whereas, again, if you earn a salary, then if you don't achieve your goal, it's only down to you. Therefore, you want to guilt trip yourself, which is why specific goals work well. And poor people have exposure to many events that can easily overwhelm their means, because the husband got sick and there's no money coming in, or some cyclone went by and now there's no roof on the house. That doesn't happen to us, or we have means to deal with that through insurance and other things. So when lots of things can throw you seriously off course, then of course you want to be able to change your mind about things. Ambiguity is your friend, is not your enemy. Another key point I want to make is that when we're talking the base of the pyramid, to me, it's very evident that you have to go for general tools, not targeted products. Targeted products is what is represented on the right, a company that has figured out what is the right drink for you, because I know so much about you, and you're a Coke Zero person versus you're a Fanta, a lemon Fanta, and so on. That requires a level of customer understanding and targeting that is just not available at the base of the pyramid. So we need to develop tools. Tools means something that you and I all use, but we use them in different ways. And frankly, all digital is like that. There's, without exception, I would say. You know, Facebook. Facebook is the same Facebook for me as someone earning $2 a day if they use Facebook. We don't have differentiated products. What we have is a collection of tools, and I will use those tools very differently to that person because of income, because of age, because of network, location, and many other things. So what is the minimum set of tools that we can all use to create our own diverse customer experiences? So that's a question of marketing practicality. Poor people are hard to reach by marketing and very expensive. So sell a generic service with tools that they can make their own. You can communicate based on use cases. Because you're not explaining the differences between the different products where the focus is on the product. Rather, it's only one service, one Facebook, and perhaps the marketing then is how I use Facebook versus someone who's younger versus someone who's in Africa. And so your marketing, the use case is much more customer-centric than the differences between the products. And there's this point of co-creation. Facebook, at the end of the day, is not, for me, Facebook is not what Facebook invented. For me, is the use that I make of Facebook. It's co-creation. And that's what allows me to feel like I can use Facebook in my way and someone who's younger in a different continent use it in a completely different way. And also want to make a point on changing behaviors, because at the end of the day, that's a lot of what's behind UI design. Eventually is some kind of changing behavior. But you can change two things: how I think about my money, the mental model, or how I go about implementing my mental model. And I certainly going up the diagonal, I think, is a big mistake. Trying to change everything at the same time is a mistake. I also think the dotted line at the bottom is a mistake, where you first try to change people's minds and then their habits. No, I think the minds are the hardest thing to change. So why don't we focus on digitizing and letting them do what they've always done, just digitally? Don't nudge them. Don't tell them about budgeting that they've not done them. Don't tell them about all the things they need to learn in order for them to appreciate your service. So it needs to be immediately useful based on their current way of thinking. And then, of course, you got them on a digital platform, then you can evolve the offer and move them into new ways of thinking about things. And I like to use a word that's, I'd never hear in financial services: engagement. When we talk about customers and services, we talk about value proposition. We talk about customer needs. We talk about features, but we never talk about engagement. Something can be really useful, but if it's not engaging, I'm not going to use it. And it's not because engagement by itself is useful, but engagement is what buys the time and buys the opportunity for the customer to learn about your service. So engagement is everything in a digital environment, which is why at the end of the day, most digital companies, not financial institutions, but most other digital companies, their main objective is to drive engagement with their customers. More clicks, just be on my screen as often as you can. And yeah, usage and revenue and all that kind of stuff and impact will come, but that will come after engagement. The objective number one is people touching my screen as often as possible. And my frustration is when I look at any kind of UI for financial services, which are kind of like the ones on the right. I mean, I have a sense that you could do print screen on every screen, and then staple all the screens, and it would work in a physical environment in a branch, because all we do is form filling. Why do we do that? Why don't we use the full capabilities of smartphones? And I am talking specifically about smartphones here, not obviously basic phones. All the visual capabilities to make it much more engaging, and not just storytelling. That is a good thing about gaming, but also how you interact with that content. As Steve Jobs said, introducing the true digital device. It's not the phone, it's a finger. That's a digital device, because with my finger, I'm doing things on the screen. We're not doing that now. We're doing more like the typing, represented by the hand on the right. The left is the finger that we use to move money around, to send money off, to cut the money because I want to send this there and keep that there. So much more using the finger as a way of acting out our financial desires. And so engagement is essential because it triggers curiosity, which is what buys the willingness of the customer to hear you out, to test you. It minimizes the sense of being tested because if you're failing at a form filling UI, you feel like an idiot. Happens to me all the time. Engagement creates a sense of journey, that we're going places, not the same thing over and over again, and that you're engaging others around you. So those are sort of my principles. And there is a question before we get into detail on UI, is whether it's one UI or many. In fact, is it any at all? Do we need a specific banking UI or money management UI? Seems like a bit of a strange question to be asking, but I was very inspired by Steve Jobs when he invented the iPod. And there's many things to like about the iPod, the packaging, the look and feel and everything, but there was, I thought, one thing that was brilliant. iPod is not, there were MP3 players before, so it's not like an iPod was the first collapsible, very small music playing machine. I think what was great about iPod at the time was that it separated out the user interface for experiencing money, the transactional element of listening a song into the little thing, which I carry with me all the time, because at any point I may want to listen to music, and separate out from the user interface was to manage my music, to digitize my CD in those days, to organize my library, to create playlists, and so on. That is not a daily activity. That's not something I want to do on the move all the time necessarily. So it was to me, it was revelatory that you need one kind of interface for everyday transactionality, which is very mechanical, where you don't want friction, versus the UI for management, which is much more infrequent, much more reflective. So that, maybe we need two types of user interface, one for the quick transactions and another one in the moment when you're thinking more profoundly about my money management and seeing where I am at with the payments that I will need to be doing next month, and not the payments, not just the payments I need to be doing now. So yeah, because those are two are very different. One is very do or action oriented, listening to music, making a payment. The other one is much more reflective. I want the full information, not just a little bit. Don't make it really quick. I want to lean forward into that experience. In terms of the transactional one, now if we go along with this, is it a specific UI or is it just no UI for the transactions? And here is what I mean. I mean, here are 4 different UIs that I already have, apps, where I could be embedding money services into. So imagine there is no mobile money transfer functionality by itself. It just doesn't exist. Why? Because anytime I want to do a transaction, it will be in a mapping context, in a geographic sense, because I've found where the nearest agent is, and I want to do the transaction there, because I've located a friend that I need to send money to, or a store, or whatever. Or maybe it's a calendar, it's the organizing, right? Because next month I need to make a payment to the school fees. So I put a forward payment into my calendar, and that's the UI. No specific UI. Or maybe it's in my contact list. A lot of money is social, so it's in my contact list, where in addition to talk to this person and chat, there's send money or request money. At the end of the day, pay now, pay later, request money now are the things that I want to do with my social contacts, and potentially the tasks. I have a list of tasks, and there's money is one of the elements. So I just put this a little bit of a provocation. I'm not necessarily advocating this. but I think it's where it's going to end up. It's not necessarily where you want to start, where there's actually no user interface for transactionality because it's just everywhere. The other possibility is no UI at all, and not even camouflaging or being behind other apps, simply because everything is done through chat. There is no structure, in other words. Obviously, that makes it a little bit more flexible, perhaps too flexible for people who would get lost in terms of how do I do a transaction. And of course, this can be written chat or more likely a entirely voice-based interface, which wouldn't look like an interface at all. Let me now, so that's on the transactionality. Now let me talk more about the more intentional multiple pods, where you get to visualize some kind of arrangement where you've done some separation of money. And here's a simple, I'm no artist, as you can see, but those of you who have heard me talk about before, I have this theory that you should be able to send money to Friday, because today was a good day, I send money to Friday because I want to be able to go out drinking with my friends on Friday, or to Tuesday because that's when my Rosca meets, I send money to Tuesday. So those are the calendars. Maybe I organize my money by analogy with a cow. I'm not saying that this is a cow. In no way is this a cow. This is just a metaphor. So cow money is my important money for big long-term things versus chicken money is for daily things. And the goat maybe is for monthly. And that is the system that works for me. Or maybe colors. So here I have a whole bunch of different pots of money, a pocket, the back pocket for your change, and then you receive money, it appears right in the middle of the screen, and with your finger you move it along the different pots. Okay, this is a very structured, explicit UI, and something like that is what our nature, probably overeducated people, would lead us to. And I kind of wonder whether that's completely the wrong approach. The better approach is this, which is much more akin to what happens in informal finance. And remember, our objective here, at least mine as a principle, is to replicate as much as possible what they see today, what they do today. And what they do today is not necessarily all laid out in front of them the way that is on the screen on the left, because that in fact that's why you have a money guard, to get money out of sight and with someone 3 blocks away, precisely so I don't see it. So there's a lot of games going on in your own psychology that you play with yourself about hiding money. And so what if your money pots somehow look like all the mess of post-it notes that I have there, where you actually with your fingers, you have to be kind of looking. I know I have some money on for something, where is it? And you kind of have to look for it. And some principle of gravity. The longer you've been without touching that money, the harder it should be for you to find it, because I mean that's what money discipline is all about. That's what that's the friction that you're building in it. So that's just, I'm not saying this is necessarily the right thing. I'm just putting as a question mark too much structure, too much transparency. Again, you're going against the principle of friction. And the easiest friction that people understand is money that I've not seen in a long time, I don't want to see now necessarily. Let me look for it when I need it. Of course, you can then simplify by having some pinned monies, which are the ones that I'm using these days, and these ones I don't want to lose. And then some money check-in counters, different pods, and you move things around. Now I want to go perhaps a little bit more narrow in focus and think about different ways that you can actually create an instruction to move money around between your different pods or to someone else and that kind of stuff. Obviously, now we do that very well, but it's boring. It's a form filling. It's form filling what we do today, and that literacy is an issue and all that. So what if we could come up with other, what I'm calling here, action metaphors, which is to actually do something. It's not a reflective metaphor like the chicken and the cow or the days of the week were a reflective metaphor. This is an action metaphor. Well, what if you had to dial money? And it's like the knobs. You actually get to turn the knobs instead of filling a form, or going down a drop-down menu, which for us is entirely intuitive. But everything is intuitive once you use it. Excel is really intuitive to me, really intuitive. I've been using it so many years, we lose sight of how unintuitive it is to first-time users. So what if you could do something a little bit more playful, more retro, where you kind of turn these knobs that from which account you want to send money, with your finger, you slide to the amount and to. I don't know. I'm not saying this is a good idea. I'm just saying there's many action metaphors that we can use other than form filling. Perhaps there's a focusing mechanism, like Apple has for the different apps that you have, where as you put your finger, they come into focus. So this idea of focus, I think, links very much into people's perception about money management, monies that are in focus, out of focus, needs that are in focus, out of focus. And so that's, to me, seems a useful metaphor. Another metaphor, I don't know whether it's a good one, is kind of making it a little bit of a game where you line up the transaction. So think of these as horizontal things that you can move around. So the first one is the what, I want to send, and you line up the send on the middle column. From which account? From the Friday money. How much? 1,000. Okay, forget about it. But basically, depending on how the frictions, you could pick frictions potentially, perhaps not for sending, but for storing money. You might say, well, this money has to be, this pot needs to be used all or nothing. There's no in between. You can't just take $1 out of the mattress. You have to empty it, or the cow. And so this is the idea, metaphor of lining up the transaction. And so you see the range of possibilities, but you see the action that you're fulfilling. Well, let me just leave it there. I don't know. I hope you weren't coming here hoping that I would tell you all the answers. If you know me, probably you wouldn't expect that. It would be more me creating more doubts and question marks. But hopefully this will give you something to think about, that there is just too much copycatting going on in our sector. And if everybody has done it a particular way, my view is that's every reason to do it differently, and not a reason to do it the same. Should we just leave it here and take some questions, comments? Sarah, what do you think?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Ignacio. And I really think anyone joining your webinars with the history that we've done together should know they're more about chatting and discussing and sharing different ideas. They're different from the courses where you are in the expert mode, and this is a chance for us to have some really creative thinking, which I think we all really, I know I do anyway.
Exactly.
So we've got a couple of questions coming in, and for those listening in, please do keep popping your questions in the Q&A function for Ignacio. So Fahad's question, and I think you did sort of cover this, Ignacio, but Fahad's question sort of says, can different types of people behave differently and therefore need different user interfaces? How you balance this depends on the type of the audience.
Yes, absolutely. But that's not what we see in reality. I mean, in theory, that possibility is there, but that's not what we see. Facebook is only one. Amazon is only one. Google is only one. I don't see any of the successful big players having done a highly segmented UI strategy. I wouldn't rule it out as a possibility, but that's not what I see. So why do we think by default that our customers are so special, so different, that they need something different? They don't. I think what you want to do, I mean, the real trick of digital, it's what's called mass customization. At the end of the day, you want to feel like everybody got their little product, but in fact, it's all variants on the same product. And that's a whole tools notion. So make sure that your tools are universal. And if you start from things like, my money management tool has to do money separation, you'll find that's universal. Everybody needs to separate money. Bill Gates separates money. He doesn't put all his money into one account. And so, lumping is another one, another core principle, which is basically the idea behind indivisibility, where if you think of a particular pot of money as being a counter that goes up and down on increments of down to 1 cent, it's very difficult to manage that. Because if I have a huge amount of inheritance money for, let's say for my retirement, it's very hard to convince myself that I can now just take 50 cents out of it to buy myself a coffee. which is why for that kind of money, you want lumping, indivisibility. You think of it as one lump. You don't think of it as a yo-yo of value that goes up and down, because that's the end of that money. So I think everybody thinks in those terms. So I think there's enough universality in terms of how the elements of money management that the tools can be universal. The only thing that differs is how much money you have, but even more importantly, how secure we are, how volatile our income is. But that's not a difference about the UI, that's a difference in our mindset. As I said before, if you are a comfortably paced wage earner, yeah, be very specific. Next month, I want to buy an iPhone. Be very specific so that you guilt trip yourself if you don't get it. But if you're poor, no, that's a terrible strategy. Why put yourself in the path of frustration when getting the iPhone is not under your control anyway? So don't think of iPhone, think of lamb, of sheep, and then you can figure out what to do with that money. So it's what we project into the UI that is different. But the UI, I don't think necessarily needs to be different at all.
And it kind of links well to Fahad's second question, which is, can the customer co-create their own user interface, especially with like apps and things like that that are appearing on mobile phones? Is that sort of a hint towards the customization, the personal usage that you were talking about?
Yeah, that's called personalization. Everybody does it. But again, how is personalization done? Through a standard set of tools. So part of the tools enable you to do certain things. Part of the tools enable you to personalize. So I think that's completely consistent with that logic of mass customization, where I'm giving the tools to personalize. But the tools are the same for everybody else. Now, when it comes to the base of the pyramid, I would be a bit careful about too much room for personalization. Things can get confusing. And at the end of the day, at the base of the pyramid, whatever works is going to work through word of mouth. If you have a problem with your UI, it's going to be your nephew that answers it, not the bank behind it. And so you don't want to create too much diversity through personalization from a practical point of view at the base of the pyramid until they're comfortable enough, and then you can give them that experience.
Too much choice can be overwhelming and confusing sometimes.
Yes.
And we've got a question here from Kathleen, who is asking, are there any interfaces targeting low-income populations that you would say are well designed?
I always hate that question because I don't want to say no, but that's got to be my answer. I've not seen, no. It's all form filling.
So our alumni have got some work to do.
I mean, playing with your money is a gaming experience, because money management is a game that you play in your brain. So why aren't we applying gaming-like user interfaces? But I see no game that is form-filling. Mm-hmm. Money management is a game that you play with yourself, because your psychology is so complicated. You're going to put all these little tricks, these frictions, to kind of commit future you. So I want future you, or future me, I want the future me to think that this inheritance money is really not to go out drinking on Friday. So that's why I'm going to attach as much imagery as I can that suggests the idea this is a noble purpose, that suggests the idea of this is indivisible, and so on. This is for the long term. This is not immediately available. These are all frictions that I choose to associate with that kind of money, because now I see it as that kind of money, and I want tomorrow to continue seeing it as that kind of money. This leads me to another thought I would like to say. Most money management applications are designed to appeal to virtuous me. There's two me's. Virtuous me, on a good moment when I'm thinking about my future, I'm having good thoughts, and then there's venial me, bad me, that wants to undo things, because bad me is venial me is subject to temptation. The mistake I think we make is that way too often we build the apps thinking that we're virtuous me all the time. And no, the app's first job has to help venial me, help bad me be less tempted. And that could be a reason why separate the money management app, which is about virtuous me from the transactional app, which is about venial me when I'm running around the street and harassed and so on. So really think about apps that talk to people not in their best moment. And we assume that our app is only going to be experienced by virtuous people.
So it's about trying to separate out the decision-making process from the actual action of paying or moving that money somewhere, so that when you're thinking about it, when you're making the decision about it, there's more friction, there's more stimulation in one way or another to make you think about, do I definitely want to do this? Or where do I want this money to go? And make you more deliberate about your thoughts. But once you've made a decision, then it's a more seamless way. Thanks to Jill for that word. I like that word, seamless. The actual acting out of the decision has less friction.
Yes, but with a limitation. I mean, yes, in principle, in general, but people who have uncertain financial lives, you cannot really separate the decision from the transaction, because if today I got a little bit of money that was more than I was expecting, that's new information. So it's not just a transaction of receiving money, it's new information, which is today was a good day. And so if there's anytime there's new information, it's a decisioning moment. Let me put it differently, it's a redecisioning moment. So for poor, and that's why I think the financial lives of the poor are so much more complicated, because we just need to be virtuous when we do the budget and that's it. Leave it alone for 6 months, 12 months. But the rest of the time we're in execution mode. And when we change from execution mode, that's when we fall apart. So in many ways, it's all about us not being reflective very often, because if we were reflective very often, we would undo yesterday's commitments. Poor people need to be reflective a lot more, because any day I made a little bit of extra money, that's new information. Any day my daughter did not get sick, that's new information. It's that severe. Living in uncertainty when knowing that your daughter didn't get sick, that's new information. So that's why for them, decision making has to be very intuitive, because you don't want to be running a budget every time there's new information. Every time your daughter didn't get sick, or every time you turned out you had a better day, you don't want to be rerunning all your numbers, which is why the analytical approach to money management, I think is completely wrong for people who live with so much uncertainty. Analytical approaches work when there's known risks, but not when there's unknown risk. When you have no idea when my next dollar is going to come from, analytics completely break down. All you can resort to is heuristic, mental models, rules of thumb, that, when I have a little bit of extra money, I'll send some to Friday, which is the me money, a little bit to Sunday, which is the family money, a little bit to Friday, to Tuesday, which is when I pay my employees. And that's it. That's your system.
Thanks, Ignacio. And we've got a nice question coming in from Jill. She's asked, there's still a focus on mass market products with limited value propositions. What would you say to these large scale providers to go forth in the more customization approach that you've described?
No, I just don't think that's consistent with digital. That's a physical product mindset. It's not a digital mindset. Digital, they don't differentiate products. It's just doesn't happen, because you don't have to. People will define their own differentiated customer experience on standard platforms. And your job is to give them as many tools as possible so they can feel like they're differentiating their experience. Their usage of it is different to anybody else's. But all they do is tools, like write a message here, like something, attach a photo. All these are tools. We are the ones giving meaning to all of that, which is why in my analogy to mobile money or digital money, I talk about sending money to Friday, where no one tells you what Friday money is. You inject the meaning into it. The last thing I think one should do at the base of the pyramid is be prescriptive. Oh, let's give them a school fees account because school fees are important for them. Yeah, they know. that's not going to work because it doesn't give them the room for ambiguity that they need. Because that pot of money, I tend to think of it as school fees. It's my emblematic use case, but it's not the only use case. Because if my daughter gets sick, I may dip into that money to go to the hospital. So leave it ambiguous. I think whenever I talk about all of this with people coming from digital financial services, they always feel all accounts need to be labeled. Yeah, okay, so let's do it to Friday, but then let them write what Friday is. No, don't let them write what Friday is. They don't do that now with their informal services. They don't put a little sticker on a jar to remind them that this is school fees and not something else. They know, it's intuition. Give them the room to undo themselves if their circumstances warrant. So you need friction up to a point. And that's, you can see that very clearly with the cow. There's lots of frictions embedded in the cow, but you have an emergency, you can liquidate the cow, you can sell the cow and get all your money back. That's what's important. Also see Jill saying, frictionless is not synonymous with seamless. Yes, exactly, absolutely. In an ideal world, just to put them in the same sentence, you would want a completely seamless mechanism for you to choose your frictions. So could a youth entrepreneur mobile money agent that helps with transacting be an analog gaming interface? Okay, Jill, I think you'll have to come on and explain that one.
Let me see if I can unmute Jill, 1 second. Jill, you should be able to speak.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Hi, Jill.
Hi there. Yeah, so I'm actually speaking from some experience that I've seen in at least one country, probably a couple here in West Africa, and they set up these young agents that also served as kind of micro entrepreneurs. And I believe part of the concept was that they would provide an interface for less literate folks in their community to begin to use mobile money and ideally in a more robust way, rather than just doing, cash in or cash out. And I was really kind of fascinated with how you were talking about gaming, because that is really so much more engaging. And, when we talk about gaming, people don't, you mentioned how people game in their head first before they game in a digital way. And is it possible to think of that maybe initially like an entry point is, first gaming with, in an analog way before you start gaming in a digital way?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the experience with agents is so diverse to expect them to fulfill a role other than the basic one. I'm not very optimistic that agents can upsell financial services and so on. I've never really believed that personally. I think most agents as storekeepers in general is a very passive activity. You just sit by your counter, people pull things off shelves and you total it up. And so it's not a very active sales process that they go through. They're just very reactive. I mean, people go to their counter once they've picked their products, kind of thing. So I've never been terribly optimistic about agents as a class. I'm not saying that it could be a subset of agents you could educate and so on. But as a class, I've never been too optimistic about using them for much beyond the pure service element of cash in, cash out. But the idea that I will link to what you're saying is, imagine that on your phone, you only have the simplest app, which only does the transactionality. You just can do none of the money management. Why? Because people's phones are going to be not very good, very small screens. We talk about smartphones, but it's not the same thing as having a bottom-end Chinese smartphone than an iPhone, right? So it's very hard to create good customer experiences when you're not in control of what screen people are using to experience you. So what about, how if people only had a transactional device in their hands, because that's what you need them to have in your pocket all the time, but you need to view your money more broadly. You go to the agent, and the agent has a tablet, so it's now you have a full screen experience, not having to worry about little buttons and so on. But in my case, that's the difference with yours. The tablet would be facing the customer, not the agent. So the agent is just a place to house the tablet. focalizing support, technical support if it's required. And it's a place where people, again, playing out this idea that most of the time it's bad me, so don't give bad me a room in, it's a big thing in my pocket that I can change all my finances. Just virtuous me moments, I'll go to the agent and do the wow experience with a big screen that is well supported. And if, the agent at that point should be able to offer customer service, but more of a technical kind if I don't know, where to click to do something. So yeah, some basic technical support for the app, but not really operating the gaming money management sort of environment that at the end of the day, it's me, it's a fiction that I'm creating between me and myself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
What do you think, Jill?
Jill?
No, I like the tablet idea. I'll have to reflect on that a little.
Great. Thanks for the question there, Jill. It was good to get us thinking differently and a different way there. We have another question in from Joao, asking whether should UI separation for day-to-day transactions and long-term management coexist in the same app, or should they be in different apps, like you just described, one app on your phone and one app on a tablet, Ignacio?
Yeah, I just put it as a hi, Joao, first of all. Great to see you here. So it's so nice to see all these people that you've had such a long relationship with. I just put it as a provocation. My instinct is that there should be a transactional app and you should do very little with it. And then there's the reflective app, which is a bit, you don't want to go into it that often. You feel like it's a special moment when I go into that, which you kind of putting yourself into virtuous me mode to go into there. I would really play with that idea. But at the end of the day, all of this that I'm giving you is ideas to be tested in the field. I don't know what the right answer is on any of it, but my instinct would be to separate them out. Doing transactions is not the same as thinking about your money.
And one final question I can see from the list, unless we have any more pop in, is from Abdullah. So he's sort of asking, are service providers aware of this different way of thinking? What do you think are some of the barriers that the service providers have to making these new user interfaces, Ignacio?
Gosh, I think there's several. First, when it comes to the bottom of the pyramid, we've all given up. We all think it's all about payments and transactions. The word transaction has become synonymous with finance, and I don't know where that came from. Finance is transactions over time. I give you money now, you give it back to me, and whether it goes one way or the other, we call savings credit, and the conditions under which it comes back, we call insurance. And yet, all that has gone out. Now, finance is helping someone pay money in real time. And so as long as the focus is transactions, we're not even engaging with the very, very set of ideas that transactions are things that need to be managed. And I think the gap there is that transactions, in my mind, transaction can live in the digital domain. It's a number, transaction is a number. I need to send $50 to someone. So that lends itself to digital. But what we've not done is offer people any bridge between digital money and the representation of money, which is represented in zeros and ones, and the representation of money in their heads, which is a mess. It's not a neat sequence of zeros and ones. It's not a neat sequence of numbers. It's a mess because you have all sorts of aspirations and needs and moods and emotions and social pressures and uncertainties, insecurities. So what we need is, in the same way as the agent is the bridge between atomic money, physical cash, and electronic money, digital money, zeros and ones, what we're lacking is the bridge between the zeros and one and the chemistry that goes on in our brains. And to expect our brains just to be looking at a bunch of numbers and feel like that has helped me think about my finances, I think it's wrong. Yes, I can. The connection with my brain for a transaction because I need to send $50. It's very straightforward, which is why this dogma has come in that user interfaces need to be very frictionless and immediate and so on. Yeah, because you're dealing with something very immediate, which is making a payment, but not about helping people think about their money. And let me be clear. When I say letting people think about their money, I'm not talking about some abstract thing. I'm talking about letting them think about the payments they will need to be making next week, next month, tomorrow, a year from now when I retire. So it's all payments, it's all transactions, but somehow our focus has been reduced to transact now. And the future plays no role in how we manage our money. It's like, no, of course, finance is all about future payments. And that is where psychology comes in, because yes, I'd like to pay for school fees next month, and I would buy food tomorrow and retire with a nice break home and all of that. The problem is all these things are competing with each other. And the whole point of psychology and the frictions that your psychology creates are about creating peace between all these different future payments that you know you'll need to have, that you would like to have. And so it's all about payments, but somehow we're just focusing on today's payments, which frankly, for poor people, I think is the least of their problems. I've never heard a poor person going, please, please, please help me get rid of my money faster. I just can't spend my money fast enough. Please give me more convenience. I'm not saying the convenience is bad. So obviously, if I have to make a payment, might as well make it convenient. But it's not a clamor for convenience that they need. What they want is help me put together the money that I need to make the school fees payment a month from now. Help me once I'm putting money aside, help me not get tempted to use that for something else. Help me if my daughter gets sick in the intervening period to really take that money and use it for something else, even though I told you originally it was for school fees. And if I don't end up putting together enough money by the end of the month that I need for school fees, please help me by giving me the rest that I need with a little loan so I can make my payment. That is what they need, not immediate payments. And I can assure you that if you help them set money aside for that school fees digitally, because when they look at the mobile phone, they see all these dramas playing out and they know how to deal with that. The payment will happen digitally. And why would you not want to pay digitally if you stored the money, you put together and stored the money digitally to make that payment? So capture the thought, capture the purpose of the future payment, and the payment will come with it. And that's, I think, the main mistake that we make. We look at savings as we have to create magnets for money. No, you don't need to create magnets for money. You need to create magnets for the stories that are competing in people's minds, and the money will follow the story.
And Jill sort of made the comment that it's about providing a solution that helps someone at the bottom of the pyramid reconcile their finances or their financial needs.
Yes.
That's where the uniqueness and
absolutely
is.
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. You have little money, very unclear how that's going to change over time because your income is not guaranteed. You have very clear needs that you have, but those needs are different sizes, different time horizons, different moral charge attached to them. It's complicated charting your path through all of that. So the objective and the ideal here, and that's why informal works, because you see your different jars and envelopes and animals in the backyard and the bricks you've piled in the backyard and all that. And you kind of, by looking around, you kind of see what kinds of money you have for different purposes. It's all kind of legible because it's visible. And the objective would be that when I look at the screen, I can have a good moment because I say, oh yeah, things are going to be all right. I will pay, I will be able to make the payment for school fees next month. And this is not just utility, it's feel good. Because think about the messages that people get on their mobile phone on digital money. Which of those messages are good news to people? None. They can do check balance, and the answer is 42. And you go, yeah, well, I knew I was poor. I mean, frankly, you have to tell me every single time. That's not good news. check balance is terrible news. I mean, you still do it for reassurance, but you're doing it not to remind yourself of how poor you are. You're doing it so that your money doesn't get stolen by the mobile operator or the bank, right? I mean, you're doing it for reassurance, but it's bad news. It's like, seriously? That's all. I look at the phone and all I see is a number telling me I'm dirt poor, and that's meant to help me, and that's meant to make me feel good. The other message that you get is transaction confirmation. Okay, now you're 42 poorer than you were because you've made the school fees payment. So when is the good news? So what I'm talking about is some kind of user interface. You look at the screen and somehow you feel good about yourself because things are under control. It's going to be okay. But that has to be a nuanced story. That has to be a complex story. It cannot possibly be a simple story. And you need to be interacting with it with your finger if you are not entirely satisfied with the story you're getting from your screen. So that's the objective. I know this is all very it's high level and aspirational and so on, but frankly, if we don't raise our ambition levels to go beyond just copying what M-Pesa has done, then I don't think we'll go very far, or further, I should say.
I agree, Ignacio. I think we need to have these sessions that enable us to open our minds to new thoughts, new ways of doing things, new challenges. We have two more questions that I'm going to cover before we close for the session. So quickly, one from Ella about the idea of using voice and voice recognition as well in this user interface. And one from Kizoto, who's asking, do you have any examples of anyone using gamified money management within Africa?
So no on the second, no, I don't. It's a technological thing. I mean, basically, it's all games are done on Java, whereas no one does programming of UIs for financial education on Java. They do it on Android forms, and then they can only do what Android thinks you should be doing. And Android wants a consistent look and feel, and so on. So you have to buy the Android logic. Like, for example, functionality is hidden behind those three lines, the sandwich or whatever it's called. And yeah, over time, you kind of develop the intuition, and we think Android is intuitive, but it's not the first day. I remember the first day I was trying to use Android, I just couldn't make heads or tails. Now I look at it, it's like, how could I have been confused? Yeah, that's habit, that's familiarity. So no, I mean, I've not seen any app that's done on Java and completely dispenses of Android capability. And the first one was what again, sorry?
From Ella, about can we use voice and voice recognition?
Yeah, voice. Yeah, I mean, voice, I think, will always be the big promise, because at the end of the day, the best UI is no UI, where things are just natural. You just speak what you want and it just happens. So I think that's got to be always an option. I think we're quite far away from that because the kind of voice that we have today, I think if you're new to all of this, you will need a little bit more instruction, a bit more prescriptive on what am I allowed to do, what am I supposed to do, what can I do, rather than a complete blank screen, which at the end of the day, which is what a voice interface is all about. So I think voice will go to eventually to the transactional user interface. You'll do all your transactions in voice, but I certainly don't see voice being a voice interface, meaning no interface for visible interface for money management. In terms of the more reflective, am I going to be okay next with the payments that I need to make next month and the school fees? I don't think I'm going to get that reassurance from voice. At least I cannot imagine that. I think that's always going to be some visual representation that I kind of extract meaning from.
Thank you, Ignacio. And I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who joined us today. We had lots of attendees, which was great. Particularly thank you to Abdullah, Jill, Fahad, Shrao, Kathleen, Ella, and Kazitso, who put some great questions forwards today. And obviously, thank you very much, Ignacio, for challenging us and thinking that we need to be more ambitious, and it's given us a good inspiration and place to start to think.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very surprised. Precious, I just mentioned Precious and the hand goes up. was very surprised you didn't say anything. Robinson, hello. Just lots of people here that I would like to talk. Jennifer, wow. Hi, Jennifer. Yeah, just lots of names here that Charles, yeah, just really, let me not go on because otherwise some people will feel left out, but really good to see you all and continuing the conversation. Mike, hi, Mike.
Lots of familiar names joining us today, which is fantastic to see our alumni back and wanting to continue to learn, interact, and share thoughts and ideas. Tomorrow, I'm going to post this webinar recording in the League of Digital Finance, and there's a comments section there, so we can always continue our discussions and comments together in that forum instead.
Great. Okay, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
And thanks, Sarah, for putting us all together and getting us organized and managing the call. You always do such a great job with it.
It's a pleasure. I always have so much fun. So it's a very nice part of my day.
Excellent. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.